So, hope you had a good weekend. Hope you got caught up. I did, sort of. If you're a fan of the Canvas calendar, please only pay attention about a week ahead right now, because I actually think I'm good into the third week of September. But if you look past into the fourth week of September or any time in October, December, that is all a work in progress. So please don't freak out. Today is a big one. But really quick, let me just mention one more thing about Canvas. If you see bonus, right? I try to put the modules, the content pages, the session pages, session 1, session 2, session 3. I kind of am trying to make those identical in structure. It's generally read, watch, do, right? But sometimes I'll say bonus read and bonus watch, right? There are no bonus assignments, so there's no credit. Bonus watch means I really think like you would enjoy this. If you're interested, particularly in the topics we are discussing in this session and have the time, check it out. Or if you don't have the time, but want to watch Big Eyes, add it to your, just watch queue, your IMDb, watch list or whatever, right? I'm not ever going to quiz you on anything labeled bonus. It's just kind of, if you're interested in this, save that for later, okay? All right, note to myself, I cannot dawdle. This is a huge lecture, and I hope we get through it. So we talked, what did we decide last Thursday? We decided it's okay to study nerd stuff, right? Was that the takeaway from Thursday? It's okay for us to both study in the genres we love, but also to create in the genres we love. And there may be some snobbery that we will continue to feel. There are people in, literary circles who still look down their nose at Stephen King. And Stephen King's reaction is, ha, 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 all the way to the Federal Reserve, where he has billions of dollars, right? But also, I will defend Stephen King, and that all of Stephen King's works are about something, just as all of your works, no matter how derivative they may seem to you, how little confidence you may have as a fledgling creator, go ahead and finish that thing you're doing, because it's worthy. It's an expression of you. The beautiful thing of art is a lot of times you're not even aware of how you are expressing something that will move someone else. You're just trying to get the job done, right? So, having given ourselves permission to study this stuff and also create this stuff, let's talk about the stuff. So this is a lecture, because I try to distill all the fun out of everything through over-analysis. This is a lecture on narratology. Anybody familiar with this word? It's a very highfalutin college word, narratology. Can you guess what it means? Study of narrative, right? Okay. Narratology examines the way that stories shape our perception of the world around us, which is why the icon for this class is not Galactus or Dr. Doom or any of my personal nerd favorites. It's the storyteller, right? All right. So let's zoom all the way out. What's the purpose of an organism? Forget narratology. What's the purpose of an organism? Right? Do we have any biology majors? What's the purpose of an organism? I didn't take bio for a reason, Bob. What the hell? What's the purpose of an organism? Firsthand.
Survive and reproduce.
Survive and reproduce. Okay. But you can't reproduce, yes, to let the species survive, but without individual survival, right? You don't do that, although very often in nature, survival of the individual is subsumed to survival of the group, the tribe, whatever. Yeah. So I'll buy that. Do you buy that? Our job is to survive and propagate, to make mini-me's of ourselves, right? Okay. Early man, and when I say early man, I'm not just talking Homo sapiens. I am not a skilled enough anthropologist or evolutionary biologist or whatever to be able to very finely, the way that other people in this building and that building can probably do, tell you that Australopithecus began to hunt and gather, right? And another precursor to man that is not yet Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon had these specific evolutionary milestones. All right, I'm lumping all of our forebears into this big pot, conceptual pot called early man, right? But especially Cro-Magnon and Homo sapiens, right? We know several things. We know that we were a species that ran together, right? We were not solitary hunters. We ran together. We were hunters, yes, but we started by gathering, right? We developed a taste for meat later. Initially, we were like a lot of our primate cousins, gatherers. We would find stuff to eat, and over time we began to not just eat it right there or carry it in our hands back to where more of us were. A lot of people think the first tool, what do you think the first tool was? Yeah. A bag. Yeah. The traditional thinking was, well, the first tool was probably a cutting edge so we could, hunt. Well, before that, it was probably some type of bag, and it probably wasn't woven. It was probably like a couple of leaves folded or stitched together, but just a way to take stuff from where you found it to where your folks are, right? Very high child mortality rate. Very high child mortality rate that persisted into the modern age, right? Into the 19th century. We still had in developed industrialized countries a shockingly to us child mortality rate. L. Frank Baum, author of Wizard of Oz. I'm approximating because I forget the raw numbers, but his mother and his father had about 12 children, and only about 4 or 5 survived into adulthood. Okay, and he lost a beloved brother early in life that really profoundly affected him emotionally. All right. Average lifespan for centuries was 21 years. 21 years. Now that's the average. Given that we already know that there's a very high child mortality rate, if the average is 21, does that tell you that a lot of folks made it well past 21 into their 40s? Yeah. Okay. A lot of orphans. What do you do with an orphan? In early societies, what do you do with an orphan? Oh, it sucks to be you. See ya. No. You don't have this sort of rigid, you don't adhere to this very rigid, very American 21st century nuclear family kind of thinking where, well, you're married to Dave's son, so I can't really parent you. It's like, I'm sorry they're gone. We will take care of you. And because we will take care of you, you will bond with us, the way human beings do, and take care of us when we and if we get old. Right? So how do we survive? Because we're not really, there are much more impressive animals than us, right? Are we S tier? No. Okay. Are we S tier? No. Okay. We're tier 2 at best individually, right? Because if you think about it, we don't have cutting teeth, we don't have stabby claws, right? Unless we spend hours in the nail parlor, we do not have stabby claws. We are individually pretty weak compared to a lot of prey, and slow compared to a lot of prey out there. Okay. So how is it that we have over hundreds of thousands of years come to dominate the planet and start to really fundamentally change our environment in frightening ways? Well, language, right? We are not the only species that has a language. Other species do communicate. But we took it to the next level. We have an outstanding memory, but a lot of other animals do too. We are pattern seekers. We are habitual pattern seekers. And that ties in with memory, and we're able to express ideas. Oh, this looks familiar to me because I remember something else that had the same set of criteria. And we're able to express it to other folks, right? We like predictability because it's hard for us to go find food at the drop of a hat, right? We like to know that every so often on an annual cycle, a giant herd of buffalo comes through, and if we pick off 2 or 3, we can eat very well for the rest of that season. We also, because of language, memory, and self-awareness, we seek meaning, right? What does this mean? Oh, here's a new phenomenon. What does it mean? It doesn't fit the pattern that I have in my memory. So how do I process that? Right? You buy this? This makes sense, right? Okay. And you're like, well, how does Homo sapiens survive? Well, it's Texas. Where's guns? Well, the guns come later, okay? Right? You can't have guns if you don't have memory, language, pattern seeking, which is very important in science, isn't it? Right? Science is all about, oh, this happened that one time. Let's see if we can reproduce the results. Right? Yada, 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 the internet. Right? We are not the only animal that has a language, but we have the most complex and nuanced language. We have the most abstract language, right? Bees are able to communicate through dancing. Okay. I read a headline. I really don't read articles. I just read headlines. That monkeys, a certain type of monkey, give each other names. Okay, they did an analysis in this one pack of monkeys or troop of monkeys or whatever, and they actually address each other by name. Crazy, right? Okay. Homo sapiens share language, experiences. Kind of, there's not a lot happening here differently. Hey, I found a lot of pollen today. The flowers are at these kind of coordinates Please, please infer from my interpretive dancing where that nice fat flower is, so tomorrow you can go out and like work. And around the fire at the end of the day, we Homo sapiens for thousands of generations shared information, right? Okay. We get together at the end of the day and share information, right? Conversation prompt, how was your day? Right? Can I do this from here? All right. No. Okay, we're done. Okay, we're done. Stop. Breaking the flow. So, if you can forgive the casual misogyny, although really, if you're a fan of Seinfeld, you realize the entire show is about casual misanthropy, which is hateful opportunity, hatred of all people. Um, there's another beat in that scene where Kramer says, "Oh, yeah," and you're thinking, "Isn't there something more to life?" Right? And that's kind of where our big brains that evolved so we could survive, so that a bunch of us could chase down a mastodon, work in a coordinated effort, and even though we would lose some of us, more of us would take down the mastodon and we would share in that for days, weeks, and survive as a group. That's the plus side of this big brain we evolved. The downside is self-awareness. The downside is being aware of who we are and asking ourselves, what is the point of life other than the obvious, which you answered earlier, which was survive and reproduce, right? Some of you are already bumming out, okay? Because this is something you will wrestle with for the rest of your lives, right? Isn't there something more to life? What gives life meaning, right? We use stories not just to share actual information, right? But also to help us take comfort, help us to answer the big questions by answering the little questions. Like, where the hell did that lightning come from? What the hell is lightning? Which god is angry right now, right? We tell stories in real time, face to face, kind of like I'm doing now. And we also tell stories asynchronously. How do we do that? How can we tell a story asynchronously, not in real time? Writing. Before writing, though, there were pictures, right? And so art, pictographic art, served many functions as it was first we figured out how to do it and developed very rapidly because it was really cool and worth spending time doing. This is a story. The best sort of interpretive minds, anthropologists have told us that this is a story about poor Dave, who was one of the ones who got killed trying to hunt the giant bison, okay? And you can see the broken spear on the ground here. You can see Dave about to be trampled or freshly trampled by the bison. Oh, what's this little bird here on a post going, eh? Our thinking is that this is not just a casual bird. This is Dave's soul rising to heaven. So there's a lot going on in this super, to our eyes, primitive cave painting from 15,000 years ago. Because even then, we had a concept of an eternal spirit, of a soul, right? We tell ourselves the story in whatever religion we choose of the eternal soul because it helps us cope with the risk that we only get one life, that death is permanent, like hardcore mode in Diablo, okay? Right? Writing, if you're a Dark Crystal fan, I finally saw Dark Crystal like 10 years ago. Missed it in the 80s. I know. I missed a lot of stuff in the 80s. I missed some stuff in the 90s. I've never seen Lion King. Disqualified. Hand in your master's degree. No, I never saw Lion King. But there's a great line where they find this ancient temple, and there's pictures, but there's also writing, and this one says, what's writing? And this one says, words that stay. I love that. A little poetry there, right? So pretty soon, we realized that it became very efficient for us, rather than telling the same story over and over and over and over, if we packed some of these life lessons we learned in reality into sort of persistent metaphors, if you will. And so there are stories that we would tell about that were fact-based about what happened today, but then there were larger stories that allow us to think about bigger things, allow us to take comfort from stuff that is stressing us, and allow us, frankly, to escape our mundane reality, right? And so these have different names. Myths, right, tend to be stories about gods. Legends tend to be stories about heroes who aren't quite gods, but they're on a level above us, right, like Heracles, right? Gods are supernatural beings. Gods are the people to whom we ascribe stuff that we can't figure out why it happened, right? Why is the sky filled with ash? Oh, the volcano god is angry, right? Why is this tree burning? Well, the sky god hit it with a lightning bolt because it was a nutty tree and caught it on fire. I don't know. Okay, but we, try to think of rational reasons for what is actually random phenomena, right? So gods are supernatural beings because they seem to have power to burn the sky and burn trees and inflict us with disease, right? Or make some of us fall in love with people that we were hoping they would fall in love with us. So there's got to be a god of love or goddess of love or whatever, right? And so we think, well, if we kiss their ass, maybe we can get them to work on our side. Maybe we can game the system. So worshiping, try to hope that these supernatural beings will give us an outcome that is favorable to us, right? Yada, 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 religion. Okay? They are parent figures, right? When you were a little kid, your parent figures, your actual parent figures, were like gods to you because they were provider of everything, right? How many times did you go in the store when you were a little kid, say, hey, Mom, buy me this, okay? And yet my girlfriend, who was afraid she had lost something, a really cherished bracelet, she kept talking about, I need to go pray to St. Anthony, because she's Catholic. He was apparently the patron saint of lost bracelets, I don't know. And I'm like, that is a very, very, very ancient behavior she's engaging in, right? She can't find the bracelet herself. Let's appear to a supernatural being. St. Anthony's not a god, but he's, supernatural, but he's a saint, right? Gods are constructs to explain the unexplainable, right? What's unexplainable if you're early man, early Homo sapiens? Weather, disasters, disease, right? Premature death of any type. Sometimes there's premature death without any obvious signs of disease like pustules or vomiting, right? It's just like, oh, they died. And we can't see why they died because we don't have an MRI. We don't know that he had a pulmonary embolism or whatever, right? Lightning is a very easy example because lightning, even if you're a science person, which I'm not, but I do understand how lightning works, doesn't make it any less awesome. Meaning full of awe, not the California sense, the actual sense, full of awe. Okay, I love being in Texas because it reminds me of New Mexico where there's a lot of lightning storms in the summer. And I love to go out on the porch and just look at nature's majesty, right? But because of science, I'm not afraid, right? I also, because of science, I know not what to do, which is grab my Festivus pole and go dancing, do a rain dance in the lightning storm. That would be bad, right? Okay. Lightning is awesome. Lightning was awesome to early man, but also scary because they didn't have science. So how do they ascribe lightning? Different stories based on where you were, what culture you were from, right? If you're from Northern Europe, Scandinavia, oh, that's Thor, the thunder god, out catting around in his goat-drawn cart, throwing Mjolnir. I can never pronounce that. And every time it strikes, boom. Don't mess with Thor. Heroes are lesser gods. Heroes, once living men or made-up men, sometimes fathered by the gods, sometimes that's added later, retconned, right? And they are typically exemplars of good behavior. And I don't mean good behavior like gallant and goofus and gallant and highlights for children. I mean admirable behavior, okay? Stuff that the synonym is heroic, right? If, as early man and a lot of modern man, is primarily concerned with winning battles, then good behavior means you're a good fighter, you're a good warrior, right? Mm-hmm. These are aspirational figures, right? Sometimes, and we've had a lot of fun with this in American culture since the 80s, is turning superheroes kind of on their ear and looking through the other end of the telescope of how terrible an idea an actual superhero would be if we made a superhero play by the real laws of America. It began arguably with Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller's Batman take on Batman in the mid-'80s. And we're still doing it, right? The MCU, the modern MCU, which is pro-superhero, has a lot of fun subverting superhero tropes about alleged heroism, right? Arguably, before Frank Miller, the whole Marvel universe as it appeared in the 1960s was not every superhero is free of doubt, is free of neuroses, okay, is free of their own psychological issues, right? And then there are tales of adventure, right? Not just heroes go out on adventures, right? Sometimes regular people go out on adventures. You've heard this word forever. What does an adventure mean, right? You know, your mother, when she puts you in a car seat, we're going on an adventure to HEB. Really? Are we? Okay. Don't get me wrong, I love HEB, but is it an adventure? Okay. Adventure means going forth from the known and safe, around the campfire, where the other people are, where the family is, where the tribe is, where the clan is, and going into parts unknown, right? And here's the important part, returning home alive. Okay, here, take this. It's dangerous to go alone, right? Why is returning home alive important, other than for selfish reasons? Go ahead.
You can't tell your story.
You can't tell a story. Okay, someone else is going to have to tell the story. Oh, poor Mary, she's dead. Didn't go well for her. She didn't grab the, magical shooty sword like, the guy in the cave told her to. In Japan, there's a whole genre, and really it isn't exclusive to Japanese, but they have a cool word for it. It's called isekai. And it means going to another world, not just having an adventure, like in Western legends where they leave and they go out into the woods and they encounter scary woods denizens and they come home safe, right? Here it's actually going to a new world, right? One of the earliest ones is like the fisherman who gets sucked down into the ocean and discovers an entirely new world underneath the sea. And that is a trope that is global. We have that a lot, right? And so there's so much of our imagined worlds is taking a regular person and going to a world that we imagine is different from ours and yet similar, right? So it isn't just that, Japanese folk tale of the fisherman that goes down to the bottom of the ocean, but any of these, right? Buck Rogers, leaving the known world, meaning modern times, and then he gets put in suspended animation, and his known world is our world, but in the far future, 2419 AD. Okay, and so what is he, a 21st century man? How does he survive in this super futuristic, technologically interesting world with jetpacks and ray guns and anti-grav stuff and everything like that? Okay, we humans, because we survive by seeking patterns. We survive by recognizing patterns. Things need to make sense. Why do I say that? How do recognizing patterns help us survive?
To predict how we're going to get attacked or how to get death prey.
Okay, can you give me a specific example, for instance?
I guess more like planning ahead.
Well, okay, planning ahead, that's a trend. When you were a little kid, did you do something and it hurt? Even though your mother said don't do that, don't put your mouth on that, don't put that in there, you did it just to see what would happen, and you had a bad outcome. Did you do it again? Maybe not. You thought twice, right? Or let's go back to hunter-gatherer phase. If I'm out looking for something to eat, and there isn't anything that I recognize as edible in the forest, but under this one tree, there's a lot of bird shit. What does that tell me? That's a clue. Because other people in the tribe have told me if you want to find eggs, look for bird shit on the ground. Why? There's a nest in the tree. So if I climb the tree, there might be eggs. Young will eat like kings. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. Tracking, I was a Walking Dead fan before it just got ridiculous. And, everybody's fan favorite character, the one with the crossbow, Daryl. Daryl was famous for being able to track. He could find anybody, okay? Which is a behavior that goes back tens of thousands of years because out in the woods, he can see what's been trampled. He can see sticks that are broken. He's very good at seeing disruptions, patterns in the natural order of the forest to kind of see where, in their case, the person they're looking for, but in the case of hunter-gatherers years ago, where the deer is, okay? And maybe some of you are hunters or have hunters in your family and engage in that type of behavior to this day, right? We survive by recognizing patterns. Randomness and chaos are stressful because they're unexpected. We don't know how to prepare for them, right? And we also, because we don't know anything about them, because they're new information, we can't predict them. One of the many things weighing on our nation's psyche in your lifetime, and actually before your lifetime, is random mass shootings. Okay? Right? So putting aside issues of Second Amendment issues, we can all agree that there are random mass shootings. And we can also agree that these are highly fucking stressful. They're stressful because too often they happen in schools where there are high numbers of innocent people who did not expect to be killed that morning when they were getting ready to go to third grade. Okay? But also, no matter what happens after the shooting, we are, as a nation, we're always why. We're always looking for the why. Why? This needs to make sense. This makes no sense. Why did this happen? And that's where politics is involved, because depending upon the prism through which you view life, the cause is, well, there's too many guns, or we don't have access to mental health resources, right? So the person couldn't get help with processing their disappointment. Or we don't have enough opportunity for economic opportunity for men in this country. So it's a late stage capitalism thing. Depending upon which lens you view life, you will come up with a different cause. And also, let's be real, different mass shooting events happen for different reasons, but it's so hard for us to get a handle on it that it's psychologically damaging to our culture. Is that fair? Right? Okay. Even bad news is mitigated by meaning, right? Right? The incel guy who plowed into a crowd of party-going students at UC Santa Barbara a while back, right? That was horrible, and people died. But it turns out he was an incel, and so many of us took comfort in the fact, well, you're just a fucking incel, all right? Let's get rid of the incels. We'll have fewer people getting hit by cars. No, that's not how it works, right? But we cling to meaning. Ancient people found comfort in myths because they helped them explain why things are that were unexplainable, right? Okay. Modern people find comfort in conspiracy theories, okay? And I'm not even joking, right? Because you have friends and relatives for whom this is not a joke, this is really their life, and they're spinning off into QAnon land, and it's becoming problematic for them. But we also have friends and relatives who go straight to some overthinking explanation for something that is best left to random chance, right? The Borderlands movie bombed at the box office. Well, that's Hollywood trying to kill video games. No, stop, relax. Okay, a consecutive series of independently executed poor business decisions led to a disappointing adaptation of your beloved video game franchise. Do not do this with that, right? And ascribe it to, and here's where myths, correspond once again to higher powers, right? This grand design put together by higher powers, whether it's the gods or the corporations, man, right? You buy that? Okay. Am I offending anybody? Then I'm not doing my job. Challenge accepted. All of us have at least one person in their life who has said this, right? This used to be a dating red flag for me. Something would happen. We'd have that first coffee date at Starbucks after we matched on Tinder, and she'd drop a napkin on the floor and she'd go, oops, everything happens for a reason. I'm like, you know what? I have blood in my shoe. I have to go. Right? Not everything happens for a reason. Ask Schopenhauer. Okay? There are schools of philosophy that are very nihilist and very dark and very popular with undergraduates because they're nihilist and dark that say we live in an absolute random universe where there is no meaning, where everything is chaos. We just, as human beings, through evolutionary biology, have learned to ascribe meaning to chaos. We are good at connecting dots to create meaning against chaos. Have you ever seen the starry night sky on a camping trip where you're away from light pollution? It's gorgeous, right? It's gorgeous, and it looks completely random, and it's beautiful, right? And yet, Homo sapiens, centuries ago, spent enough time staring at the night sky to where they could connect dots and create constellations. Is there any such a thing as a constellation? There is not. It is entirely us creating a pattern where there is not a pattern intrinsically. You're like, well, a constellation does exist because it's kind of a star cluster in space. No, because we are looking at that star cluster from one direction. And a lot of the stars in the same constellation aren't even close to each other. But to us, they look close to each other because it's parallax. Do you buy that? Okay. All right. Why do we create meaning? Because life is hard. Life is hard for you. You had, congratulations, by the way, you just lived through one of the most stressful experiences of your life, which is the first week of college, no matter what your grade. Right? Even if you're a returning student, first week is very stressful because it's different from the last week. Because you have a new roommate that you have to dominate, right? You have a new dorm that you have to find the tallest kid in the dorm and beat the shit out of him so that... Some historian said sometime, that life for peasants in the Middle Ages was nasty, brutal, or brutish, and short. But really, that applies to many of us, even in the modern era, right? So folk wisdom, which is asynchronous storytelling, which is children learning from their family members, from their elders, older brother and sisters, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandmas, the lessons of life that they can pack into their big old brains that have deep memory. so they don't have to learn from everything from experience, right? Although many of your professors, myself included, will encourage you to make mistakes, to fail, right? Because many of you are inured to failure because you're afraid to have that trauma of, oh, it didn't work, right? You do learn from failure. We want you to have that experiential learning, but a lot of it is received learning, received wisdom through folk tales and fairy tales and fables, right? Okay. Stories persist and stories evolve, and stories we'll examine in later weeks get retconned, which is a new take, right? Myths persist as tales of gods, legends persist, and I'm sort of defining like broadly as tales of heroes that can sometimes guest star gods, sometimes Heracles, a hero, a demigod, but part human, will appeal to his dad, Zeus. Okay? So Heracles, Nepo baby, you decide. And then there's the lower scaled stuff, the more domestic stories, closer to home, closer to hearth, closer to the campfire, fables and fairy tales, right? And in our industrialized Western eyes, we have for years kind of held fairy tales as a thing apart for children, but they are not. What they are is tales told to regular folks that are not myths and legends. They're just fun, imaginative stories, right? Sometimes morally instructive, sometimes not. If it's super morally instructive, ends in a moral, that's a fable, right? So there's an essay that I'm not going to assign you, and you're welcome, called On Fairy Stories. And it was originally a lecture and then published as a monograph by J.R.R. Tolkien. Do you know this name? He created Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's sort of like, you know, in the Western English literature tradition, kind of the godfather of world building, because he kept going back to the same world he created and adding more stuff and inventing yet another language, because he was also a linguist, right? But he kind of created a kind of a manifesto about how it's okay to make up new fantasy on fairy stories, right? Because the fantastic, the imagined, the transportive stuff that happened not to us, that requires some imagination to escape into, is great. There's lots of good reasons to do this. You know, he said, small wonder that spell means both a story told and a formula for power, right? Casting a spell. If I'm doing it right, telling you an involving story that moves you, cast a spell. Okay? You're transfixed on the screen or the text or my voice if I'm doing it right. Right? Okay? And one of the concepts, I'm not assigning you this essay, but I am assigning you a shorter article that tells you everything you need to know. It's a good digest. It's a blog post about On Fairy Stories. So you do need to read that. One of his concepts is he talks about the perilous realm, right? A lot of fantasy stories are adventure stories, meaning leaving the safety of the campfire and the village that we live in, the known space, and going out beyond the firelight, the safety of the firelight, the safety of the village fires, into the woods, into the dark, into the perilous realm, the unknown, right? That's where the fun stuff is. But that's also where the danger is, right? Okay, Pablo Picasso had this to say about art. Art is not the truth, art is a lie that makes us realize truth. At least the truth that is given to us to understand. I like that last part because Picasso, being a Catholic, believes in doubt, believes that as rational and science-based we cannot be. His faith still acknowledges that God does things that we will never understand, that we are not meant to understand. That's a key tenet in a lot of beliefs, but also the Catholic belief. It's where faith comes from, the mystery of faith, the not knowing, the doubt, right? Okay, Picasso. Tolkien also talks about this term called subcreation, which to me is not making submarines. I got really excited because I like military games. But subcreation means being not God, but like God, creating your own world, acting like God does in the first book of Genesis. Literally, world building in our sense is an act of subcreation, right? Okay. And if you're going to do that, he was a big believer in everything sort of needs to make sense. Everything needs to align, which is why when the elves, in his stories, when the elves start talking to each other in their language and the hobbits are like, what are they doing? Okay? He's not just making up nonsense words. He has done the world-building work of creating a whole language that the elves speak in. Right? So the concept of mythopoeia, I can't even pronounce this, mythopoeia is using motifs and concerns from mythology. We world builders, we fantasy writers, we science fiction writers, and horror writers, to an extent, like to borrow from mythology. Or we like to create our own mythology. Why do I have this image? Because it's a sept. What do we know about the core religion of Westeros in the seven kingdoms? Well, there are 7 kingdoms, and there are also 7 gods, right? And there's this whole religion that we see in different episodes of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, where you've got the crone and the this and the that. There are 7 sort of nameless gods that different people worship. Right? And that's kind of cool, right? Okay, early Perilous Realms, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Odyssey, right? Okay, is there world building in the Iliad? No. They go to Troy, and everything's kind of based on what was accepted to be fact at the time. But on the world's worst drive home from work, the Odyssey, Homer has fun taking Odysseus to all kinds of random islands in the Mediterranean that have all kinds of interesting things, right? The return home, he's venturing through the perilous realm to get home to Penelope, right? There's something called a true story written like around 200 years after Christ by Lucian, a Roman writer. And it's a travelogue. It's a parody of travelogue stories, which were very popular back then, about going to the moon and the sun. Okay? 1,000 Nights and a Night, right? Takes us, which is essentially an anthology of Middle Eastern and Persian, Arabian folk tales, but take us to all kinds of interesting places beyond, the known world at that time. The Divine Comedy, okay? He gives us literally a tour of hell and a tour of purgatory and a tour, I think, of heaven. There was a historic person named Cyrano de Bergerac. He wasn't just a literary character. There's a real person named Cyrano de Bergerac. And he wrote a novel called Empires of the Moon. It's about some Earth people go to the moon and get involved in the moon people's war with people on the sun. Gulliver's Travels, you're familiar with. Voltaire, freaking Voltaire, wrote a novella called Nico Negas about a person who lives on Syria, or lives, on a planet circling Sirius, the star. Right? It isn't just science fiction. It isn't just other, the parallelist realm sometimes is very close to us because we have imagined magical creatures or supernatural creatures invading our space rather than our invading them, right? And we see that in a lot of rituals that happen today. I'm from New Mexico, so I'm from a very, very traditionally Catholic state. And so I'm used to altars and santos in people's houses and businesses and stuff like that, right? But that's not unique to New Mexico. It happens all over the world, right? Okay, here we go. Here are a couple of santos. Even at HEB, okay, HEB is not free of the presence of the supernatural because you can buy votive candles to a lot of folks. So fairy tales, conte de fées, is ordinary people in extraordinary situations. They're not adventures per se, but they are, sometimes they can take an adventure kind of thing, but it's ordinary people, regular folks encountering something magical, something weird, right? And we've had fairy tales forever. But fairy tales began to, it's interesting, she does her work in the 1600s, right, kind of towards the end of the 100 Years' War and the fact that Protestantism is here to stay and there's been a reformation of the Catholic Church and this big schism in the West, in Europe, is kind of settling out. It's interesting that many people, as a result of the religious war kind of settling out to a tense detente, are thinking about, well, if Protestantism is true, if all that is true, if the church isn't really as mystical as I thought it was, as the Catholics purported it to be forever, then I'm missing some magic in my life. So let's study fairy tales. And so Comtesse d'Aulnoy listened to fairy tales close to her and wrote them down. And so she started writing down what had been, passed down verbally forever. And she also wrote some of her own. The Brothers Grimm. She's working in France. The Brothers Grimm were working in, the Holy Roman Empire. It's German. Talking to people from all the different polyglot cultures in the Holy Roman Empire, getting them to tell them their stories they tell kids and writing them down. Andrew Lang did the same thing with a whole long series of books in English. And so it's interesting that at the beginning and well into the Industrial Revolution, while man was going Western man was going full bit into rationality and science, there seemed to be a counterbalancing interest in the weird, the magical, the spiritual, right? Hans Christian Andersen, another one. These guys would listen and record folk tales, in his case from Scandinavia, but he would write his own. And some of his original fairy tales, Thumbelina, Princess of the Pea, Little Mermaid, Steadfast Tin Soldier, which is metal. All of these are like super sad. They're so Scandinavian, right? And the Ice Queen, which from Frozen. right? Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Big, long, is it a fairy tale? It's many things. Written in the middle of the 19th century, 1865, by Charles Dodgson, okay, in an attempt to entertain and out of storytelling sessions he had with an actual little girl named Alice and her friends. Followed by a sequel, Through the Looking Glass. Is this a modern British fairy tale? I'm going to say yes. Right? And that leads us, how are we doing on time?
15 minutes.
I got it done. To what I consider the, foundational American long-form fairy tale, Wizard of Oz. Which, tell me as it sounds familiar. Lewis Carroll. Entertaining children, telling stories over and over, embellishing, creating a fairly large imagined world with a lot of satirical elements, working very closely with an illustrator, in this case John Tenniel, to do iconic etchings of the imagined characters in both books. And let's look at the time. Okay, 1865, 1871. So like 40 years later, because this is published in 1900, Frank Baum does the same thing. And we'll go into Frank Baum's life on Thursday, but he was someone who was a sickly dreamer as a kid, related to kids, entertained his own children and kids from the neighborhood by telling stories. Decided to tell one really big story, having worked with fairy tales and nursery rhymes. And we'll see what he was doing in the lead up to Wizard of Oz, working with an amazing illustrator, W.W. Denslow, to create iconic images and designs that persist. You can't break Denslow's original character designs out from everything that would later be Oz for decades, right? This was published in 1900, and it's assigned reading now. And you're welcome. Okay, that went faster than I thought. I felt like I was rushing. Any questions, any concerns, any arguments, any pushback? Did I upset you? Talking about random school shootings. Okay? Did I upset you talking about not everything needs to connect? Did I upset you talking about we create religion to kind of answer this need that we have for meaning in our lives? And I'm someone who considers himself a religious person. No questions at all? No feedback at all? Nothing to discuss? Really? Thank you.
The lottery was created to catch time travelers. That's my conspiracy theory.
What?
The lottery was created to catch time travelers.
Oh, I see. All right. Why? Because they're the ones that win? Oh, okay. All right, I buy that. What's another conspiracy theory that maybe you accidentally ascribed to? Yeah.
JFK assassination.
What do you think that was about?
I don't know. The government sucks.
Well, it sucks. I mean, that's not a theory. That's obvious. But that has been fodder for many conspiracy theories. The mafia did it. LBJ did it. That's heresy here in this part of Texas, right? Less than 2 hours from Johnson City. But yeah, okay. What else?
Jeffrey Epstein, did he kill himself?
But he didn't.
Yeah, but
I
like.
mean, but he totally didn't. No, right, Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, what else? What about in fandom? Right? We video game nerds ascribe anything that we don't like about the video game business to evil corporate greed heads trying to make my life individually miserable, right? Okay. What's the new Star Wars game? What's the new Star Wars game?
Hunters?
No, it launched last week.
Outlaws?
Huh?
Outlaws.
Yeah, Star Wars Outlaws. Star Wars Outlaws is getting less than 100%, on Metacritic because the French are trying to kill Star Wars. Okay. I don't need to read Reddit to know that somebody posted that. Okay. We all do it because when we feel powerless, that's another component, right? When we feel like we can't affect, or when random bad stuff happens to us that we can't control, we like to ascribe narrative to that, right? It's something that we've developed for evolutionary survival, not the healthiest thing in the world, given the internet. All right, thanks for hanging in. Thanks for being so patient. I'll see you on Thursday. Check Canvas for new stuff to do.